Hello and welcome back to the online learning session. Let us see the topics to be covered in this lesson. Under Unit 3 towards Civil Disobedience Movement, we are going to study number 1 Swaraj Party 1923, number 2 Simon Commission 1928, number 3 Purna Swaraj, Lahore Session of Congress 1929, number 4 Roundtable Conferences held in London and Dominion Status, number 5 the Salt March and the Civil Disobedience Movement 1930, number 6 Gandhi-Irwin Pact 1931 and Pune Pact 1932. So let us move ahead and start our discussion from Swaraj Party 1923, and we'll learn about its formation and objectives. Students, we have seen that in 1922 non-cooperation movement was withdrawn. What was the result? What was the outcome? What was its effects on the minds of the leaders and the nationalists? See students, the leaders and nationalists were disappointed by the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement in 1922 because they could feel the momentum of the movement and they were expecting to achieve Swaraj as soon as possible. But when we see in 1922 the non-cooperation movement to be withdrawn, they were left with total disappointment. Then what happens next? We see that C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj Party within the Congress in 1923. Now there is a question, who formed the Swaraj Party? So you are going to answer C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru. If the question asks when was it formed, it was formed in 1923. Now let us go through the objectives of forming the Swaraj Party. Why was this party actually formed? See students, we see that it was formed to oppose British policy within the councils. The councils, the places where the laws were discussed and the laws were made. So in spite of a retaliation fighting with the government, these people thought to oppose the British policy within the councils and then to bring about a change. And this change we can see in the point number 2, to argue for reform and also demonstrate that these councils were not truly democratic. Now what do we actually learn from this topic? What is the crux of the topic? The leaders were there to argue for a return to council politics. It meant that instead of fighting with the government, they will argue in the Congress for a return to council politics. There they can discuss the laws, there they can discuss the different policies of the British. So do pay attention to the timeline of events, because these will help you understand and learn and memorize the concepts very easily. Now students, we move on to Simon Commission. We'll learn what was this commission all about, what was the issue related to this commission, and why was this commission boycotted. So let us see some background of this commission. We see in the Government of India Act in 1919, it had announced that in 10 years, let us highlight this, in 10 years from 1919, a royal commission will be set up to report on the working of the Act and suggest constitutional changes if required. Let us read it again for a clear understanding that in 10 years from 1919, what does this 10-year mean? From 1919, 1929. Clear? That in 10 years from 1919, a royal commission will be set up to report on the working of the Act. Which Act? The Government of India Act 1919, through which the India was being governed from 1919 onwards. So in 1929, a commission will be set up to report on the working of this Act of 1919, and if that commission finds some changes to be made, it will suggest those constitutional changes. So basically this is the background of Simon's Commission. Now let us see the issues related with this commission. The commission was composed entirely of British members. Now this was the main bone of contention, that the commission was composed entirely of the British members with not even a single Indian member included in it. Clear? Now why would have this outraged the Indians? Because see, the British are coming, the commission is coming to report some changes and the working of the Act in the context of India. So Indians were ought to be a member of this commission, but they were not made a member of this commission. Clear? Now, what was this seen as? This was seen as an insult to the Indians, who were right in saying that their destiny could not be determined by a handful of British people. This is it. Let us move on to important question related to this. Why was Simon Commission boycotted? So here we see in topic 1, we see what is the background of this Simon Commission. Next we see what was the main issue related to the boycott of the Simon Commission, and let us see in details why was this commission boycotted. As we have seen, students, that Indians were outraged, okay, because not even a single member in the commission was Indian. So this was the main bone of contention. Now let us see some other points. And what happened next? People were chanting the slogan, Simon go back. So when Simon Commission arrived in India, it was greeted with black flags and this slogans, Simon go back. Next we see what happens afterwards. When people were protesting against this commission, the people resorted to lathi charges to suppress the movement. Okay, when the people were against this movement, when they were protesting against this movement, they were been beaten with lathis. People resorted to lathi charges and tried to suppress the movement. Even senior leaders like Pandit Nehru were not spared. So, and one more important event we see here, that in Lahore, you may be well aware of one of the most famous extremist Congress leader, Lala Lajpat Rai. What do we see in his regard? We see in Lahore, Lala Lajpat Rai, who was leading the demonstration against the Simon Commission, was brutally lathi charged. He died later that year due to injuries sustained then. We also lost an extremist leader in the lathi charge of this commission, of this protest, and he was Lala Lajpat Rai. Where was he leading this demonstration? He was leading this demonstration in Lahore. So this is all about Simon Commission. We'll move on to Purna Swaraj. And let me remind you of the timeline. What was the timeline of this? It was 1927 and 1928. So before 1 year this commission arrived in India, and this also became one of the points for enraging the Indians. Now when we come to Purna Swaraj, we come to 1929, and this was declared, the resolution was adopted at Lahore session of Congress. Clear? This could be asked as a map work, so please pay attention to the names of the places related to the Indian national movement. Now what do we see? What is Purna Swaraj all about? See students, let us first of all bifurcate this term, and Purna means complete and Swaraj means independence. So we were about to adopt a resolution which was related to complete independence. Let us see. In December 1929, under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru. So let us underline this point. This is an important point. The year is 1929, and under whose presidency? Under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay. The Lahore session of Congress formalized the demand of Purna Swaraj, okay, or full independence for India. So 3 points to be taken out from here are December 1929, presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, and what was to be adopted? Purna Swaraj, or full independence for India, was to be adopted. Now we see it was declared that 26th January 1930 would be celebrated as the Independence Day. It's a very, very important event in the history of India, students. Please pay attention to point number 2 and point number 3, because it's going to lead us to something very, very important, and in a matter of about a few minutes we are going to see that. So we see that 26th January 1930 would be celebrated as the Indian Independence Day, when the people of India were to take a pledge to struggle for complete independence. But let us focus the timeline. It was in 1929, the declaration, the resolution for Purna Swaraj was adopted in 1929, and this is being made for 1930, 26th Jan. Now in 1930, when we arrive at 26th January, the day of independence, celebrations attracted very little attention. So it was a failure ultimately in 1930. Now students, time and again I have discussed in the class that This was the very fact behind making of 26th Jan as our Republic Day, which we have celebrated recently. Okay, so since we could not adopt 26th January 1930 as our Independence Day, we could not celebrate, we could not declare Purna Swaraj complete independence on 26th January 1930. We reserved this date for another important event in the history of India, and that is what we celebrate as Republic Day. Now in the comment section I would like you people to please tell me, what do you mean by republic? What do you understand by the term republic? For hint, you can relate to the chapter 1 class 9th, the French Revolution, when the government of the Jacobins comes to power. They converted France into a republic, and there we have discussed in detail what do you actually mean by republic. So let us move ahead. Now a very significant event in the history of India, students. Like you can also call it as a vague offer, an offer which did not have any content, which did not have any substance in it, which were offered to us by the British. And this event is known as the Round Table Conferences, where we were about to be offered a dominion status, though it was a very vague offer. It was having nothing substantial what the British said. There were a lot of difference between what they said and what they meant. Okay, so why is it called as you can derive from the name conference? Of course a lot of people will be there to attend this meeting, this event. And why was it called round table conference? Because the table alongside which the people will be sitting was round in shape, so that is why it is known as a round table conference. Okay, now let us see. First of all, we were about to be offered a dominion status because we were struggling for it. So let us first understand the meaning of dominion status. I know you will be time and again be asking me that, sir, please tell me what is the meaning of dominion status. So let us clarify this term right here. British colonies which were under crown rule means under British emperor, were given the chance to form their own autonomous government. Okay, we'll go through the points clearly, very easily. You will be able to understand the meaning of dominion status. So first of all, we see that the colonies, for example, consider India here. Now the colonies were offered to form their own autonomous government. Autonomous governments means self-government. Let us understand by taking India as an example. Suppose we are the leaders and nationalists during the struggle phase. Okay, so we were struggling for our own government. So this dominion status meant that we were allowed to form our autonomous government. It meant that people of India will be included in the government, and the government will be made by the people of India. Okay, so this was a government known as self-government. Now let us see the point number 2, which comes after a but. After first point we have a but. We see we were allowed to form our own autonomous government, but though the government thus formed was autonomous, it still owed allegiance to the crown. We were not getting out of the British rule. Okay, are you getting me? We were not getting out of the British rule. The only point of difference here was that we were still going to be a part of Britain, but the government was to be formed in India by the people of India. Still we had to owe an allegiance to the British crown. Still we were to be considered as a part of Britain, as a colony of Britain. The only difference which makes dominion was that we were about to form the government by ourselves. Okay, but we were still going to be a part of Britain. So this is known as the dominion status. Thus the states were termed as dominion states, and if we got this status, our dominion, our India would have become a dominion, and we would have got this dominion status. It meant what? It meant government formed by the people of India, by the residents of India, by the native Indians, but still we had to owe an allegiance to the crown. Still we had to remain under the crown. So this is what we mean by dominion status. Let us see this through a crux. It projected the idea of self-governance. It projected which idea? It projected the idea of self-governance, and this is what we mean, government by the people of India, of the state, but also at the same time it was subject to the crown. Okay, as I have repeatedly discussed, the only point of difference was we were about to form our own government by our own people, but we were still to remain under the crown, we were still to remain a part of Britain. Okay, now let us move to the first round table conference and learn something about it, which was held in 1930 in London. Clear? Now we'll break this topic into three subtopics. We'll first try to understand the aims and objectives of this roundtable conferences. As we have already discussed, here we were about to get dominion status. Though it was a vague offer, it did not have anything substantial in it. British were playing fool with us. So second, we will see who participated in these conferences. The first, the second and the third roundtable, three roundtable conferences in total actually took place, and who all participated in this, and at the last we'll see the outcome of all these roundtable conferences. So let us move ahead. What was the aim of the first roundtable conference? Let us see some background. There were increasing demands of granting dominion status to India. Okay, just for example, imagine I am any of the leaders of Congress, and I am continuously with my party members demanding from the British government to grant India the dominion status among a certain section of the British polity. Clear? Second, we see in India the freedom movement was in full swing with its demand for Swaraj or self-rule, spearheaded by charismatic Gandhi. Now let us see who participated in the first roundtable conference and how significant was it. We see that the Indian National Congress decided not to participate. See students, who participated is very important, but who chose not to participate is equally important in the context of roundtable conferences. Okay, so the first roundtable conference was boycotted by the Indian National Congress. Now here you can see in point number 2 who participated in the first roundtable conference from India. Among the British Indians, we see the following representatives attended the conference: Muslim Leagues, Hindus, Justice Party, Sikhs, Liberals, Parsis, Christians, Anglo-Indians, European landlords, labor, women, universities, Sindh, Burma, other provinces, and representatives from the government of India. Okay, but one of the major party at that point of time, the Congress, resorted not to participate in the conference. So what was the outcome of this conference? Let us see what happened after this conference. The outcome was that this first roundtable conference in 1930 held in London was considered as a failure. The British government understood the importance and the need for the Congress party to make any decision on India's political future. Now this was also understood by the British government that Congress party had to make any important decision in the future in the India's polity. Okay, now we'll move on to the Salt March and the civil disobedience movement. Another significant movement in the history of India during the national freedom struggle for achieving independence. So what is the background? Let us first of all go through the background and try to understand what circumstances were building for the Salt March or the launching of the civil disobedience movement. Okay, so Mahatma Gandhi found in salt a powerful symbol that could unite the nation. So salt was found to be a powerful symbol. On 31st January 1930, he sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin, Lord Irwin, stating 11 demands. He wrote 11 demands of his in the letter, and he sent that in January 1930. Some of these were of general interests, others were of specific demands of different classes, from industrialists to peasants. Now in the non-cooperation movement, we have seen also during the First World War, we have seen what were the demands of different social groups. So Gandhi ji is raising all those demands through his letter, which was addressed to the Lord Irwin. Let us move ahead. The idea was to make the demands wide ranging, okay, that all classes within Indian society could identify with them and everyone could be brought together in a united campaign. So basically, salt is a powerful symbol which is seen to unite the people at that point of time, and this was the thing which was raised, which was considered at that point of time a powerful symbol to carry on the movement further. Now we see what became the immediate cause of the salt march. As we have studied salt to be a powerful symbol, the salt was chosen to carry the movement further. Let us see the demand to abolish the salt tax. Here we need to pay more attention, students. He demanded to abolish the salt tax. Okay, now what was this salt tax and salt law all about? Why did it become the bone of contention at that point of time? Because salt was something which was consumed by both the rich and the poor. Okay, salt doesn't see any difference between a rich and the poor. Okay, it equally makes the food salty, be it for rich or be it for poor, and it was one of the most essential items of food. But what happened? What was the actual issue here? It lies in point number 2, the tax on salt and the government monopoly over its production. These are the two important points which form the bone of contention here, students, which you need to mark: the tax on salt and the government monopoly over its production. First of all, let us imagine this is a area which is producing salt. Okay, so this area was under monopoly of the British government. Only British could produce salt from here and only British could sell salt from here, and whatever salt they sold in the market was having taxes. People had to pay taxes on salt, plus the government had monopoly over its production. Then let us see what this event is being termed as. Mahatma Gandhi declared that the government monopoly over the salt production plus the tax on salt revealed the most oppressive face of British rule. First they come in India, they try to civilize the Indians, they burdened the Indians with tons of taxes, and then we see that such a commodity which was of very general, very common use, being consumed by the rich and poor alike, they imposed taxes on it, and also the government established its monopoly. The exclusive right over anything is known as monopoly. So other than British, no one could produce or sell salt here. Now let us see, Mahatma Gandhi's letter was in a way an ultimatum. Ultimatum means the final warning, a sort of warning, but here, since he had written that if the demands were not fulfilled by 11th March, the letter stated the Congress would start a civil disobedience campaign. So this was one of the last warnings given to the British. Irwin was unwilling to negotiate. Who was the viceroy at that point of time in India? He was Lord Irwin. When all these demands were seen by Irwin, he was unwilling to negotiate. He was not going to accept any of the demands of Gandhiji. What happens next? Let us see. Now the Salt March, the launch of this event takes place. Okay, let us see. So when Irwin was totally unwilling to negotiate, Gandhiji started his famous Salt March accompanied by 78 of his trusted volunteers. What was this march all about? The march was over 240 miles from Gandhiji's ashram in Sabarmati. Let us highlight these points. From Gandhiji's ashram in Sabarmati to the Gujarati coastal town of Dandi. So what was this march all about? It was basically from Gandhiji's ashram in Sabarmati. That is also an important place and also important from the map skills questions perspective. Okay, to the Gujarati coastal town of Dandi. Again an important question, important place related to map skills. The volunteers walked for 24 days about 10 miles a day. Okay, thousands came to hear Mahatma Gandhi wherever he stopped, and he told them what he meant by Swaraj and urged them to peacefully defy the British. See students, still he is telling, he's explaining the people, is urging the people to peacefully defy the British. Still he is not resorting to violent means. On 6th April he reached Dandi. he ceremonially violated the law. Which law, students? The salt law. Okay, manufacturing salt by boiling seawater. Okay, this marked the beginning of the civil disobedience movement. So this was the civil disobedience movement. What are the points to be taken out from here? The points to be taken out from here is that he ceremonially violated the salt law, number one, by boiling the seawater, and this marks the formal beginning of the civil disobedience movement. Now here an important question arises, that what is the difference between non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement then? The only one very basic point of difference. The basic point of difference between the non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement was that in the non-cooperations, Indians were only not cooperating with the British, number one. Number two, they were boycotting their goods and institutions. That's it. But in the civil disobedience movement, we see that we were not only not cooperating with the British, but also peacefully breaking their laws. Clear? We were breaking their laws as well in the civil disobedience movement, which was marked from the salt march, which was marked from boiling of the seawater, okay, and the manufacturing of salt. So this is the basic point of difference between the non-cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement. However, there are a lot of more points of differences between these two movements, but right now we only need to understand, we only need to learn the basic point of difference between these two movements. Okay, students, now we are going to study about the Gandhi-Irwin Pact in 1931, which took place after the launch of the civil disobedience movement, after the Salt March had taken place. Let us see what was this pact all about, but before that let us go through its background. Okay, in 1930 we see the Salt Satyagraha or the Salt March was conducted by Gandhiji, and India and Gandhi both received a worldwide attention. The British government in India was criticized for its unjust treatments of Indians. Clear? Second, we see that Gandhi and many other leaders were imprisoned, an important development after the Salt March, along with thousands of Indians. Okay. Number three, Lord Irwin wanted the issue to come to an end. Still, after imprisoning all these leaders, prominent leaders, he wants the issue to come to an end. So what actually is done by him? Gandhi was released from prison in January 1931, and what do we see after that? Gandhi met Irwin and held negotiations. He should have done this earlier. Okay, a letter was sent to Irwin. He didn't negotiate at that point of time. This time you are negotiating when you are being criticized at the international level. So it was for the first time that the two were meeting as equals. Equals means in equal capacities. No one is to be considered inferior of anyone else. Okay, now we see what are the features of this pact. The Indian National Congress agreed, the Congress party agreed to take part in the round table conference, and therefore the INC would set up, the Indian National Congress would set up the civil disobedience movement. Students, just recall that the first roundtable conference was boycotted by the Congress. Therefore, which roundtable conference would it be? Yes, exactly, it is the second roundtable conference. Now, the Indian National Congress agreed to take part in that. But what happens after that? INC also agrees to stopping the civil disobedience movement. This was one of the main points behind the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. Okay, release of those who were arrested for taking part in the civil disobedience movement. We see that people, a lot of people, thousands of Indians were arrested, after the launch of civil disobedience movement, and the government, the British government, also agreed to remove the salt tax. So these are the features of Gandhi-Irwin Pact. And now we will see the result of the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, which took place in 1931. The Congress participated. See, the Congress participated in the second roundtable conference. It agreed to release all political prisoners to save those involved in violence. Okay, the British government agreed to release all the political prisoners to save those involved in violence. it agreed to revoke the ban on the Indian National Congress. The ban was to be removed from the Indian National Congress. It agreed to permit the collection of salt by people near the sea coasts. This is an important development, students. Okay. So the British government permitted the collection of salt by people who were living near the coasts, near the sea coasts. Okay. And in number 5 we see the government agreed to the lenient treatment to all government servants who had resigned from service in the wake of the civil disobedience movement. A lot of government servants had also resigned from the services of the British administration. So here we see that the government agreed that it will be lenient in treating all the government servants. It won't be harsh. Clear? So this was, till now we have studied 1923, the Swaraj Party. We see 1927, 1928, the Simon Commission. Then in 1929 we see the Lahore session of Congress and the declaration of Purna Swaraj. Then we see 26 January 1930. Students, then we see the roundtable conferences being held in London, which was boycotted by the Indian National Congress. And then the launch of the Salt March takes place. And the disturbances, the issues between the two sides come to an end by the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. Let us now move ahead and see the second roundtable conference held in 1931. What was the aim of this roundtable conference? Major difference between the first and second roundtable conference was the INC was participating in the second one. This was one of the results of the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, as we have studied right now. So what was the aim? British decided to grant a communal award for representing minorities. Again, the students, the British is trying to play games with the Indians. The British government is trying to play with the communal award for representing minorities in India by providing separate electorates, separate constituencies for minority communities. Okay, Gandhi was against this because Gandhi could smell the difference and what could that difference lead to in the coming years. So who participated in this second roundtable conference? We see that British Indians were represented by the Indian National Congress, Mahatma Gandhi, Rangaswamy Iyengar and Madan Mohan Malviya. Depressed classes were represented by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Now what was the outcome of this second roundtable conference? We see Gandhi and Ambedkar differed on the issue of separate electorates, as we have discussed right now that Gandhiji was not in favor of separate electorates based on communities, based on caste. Okay. Now Gandhi was against treating untouchables as separate part from the Hindu community. The issue was resolved through Pune Pact 1932, which we are going to study in about a matter of few minutes. Again, the second roundtable conference could also be considered as a failure. Why? We see that while the Indian National Congress claimed to speak for the whole of the country, other participants and leaders of other parties contested this claim. So there was a point of difference, there were differences among the participants themselves, students. All the people, all the participants from India who had gone to the second roundtable conference were not united. While the Indian National Congress on one side claimed to speak for the whole of the country, it said that we are representing the whole country of India. Who says this? The Indian National Congress. A few other leaders, a few other participants contested this claim that how could you represent the whole of India when we are also existing in India as individual entities. Clear? So this was the aim, the participation and the outcome of the second roundtable conference. Now what does this second roundtable conference lead to? Before we get into that, we'll see the third roundtable conference which occurred in 1932. The Indian National Congress and the Labour Party decided not to attend it. The Indian National Congress was not invited, though. Indian princely states were represented by princes and diwans. Okay, so we see the representation of princely states where Rajas and Maharajas in India used to exist at that point of time. So these states are known as princely states, and British Indians were represented by the Aga Khan. It means the Muslims. Okay. Now what was the outcome of this third roundtable conference? Not much was achieved in this conference also. See students, right from the first roundtable conference, in the outcome we see that it was a failure. The second roundtable conference was a failure. Even in the third roundtable conference, we could not achieve something substantial. Why? Because we have already discussed on this slide, about the dominion status, the cause behind the roundtable conferences. Why were these roundtable conferences being held in London? Because the British, as they said, were about to give dominion status to India. But as I have said that nothing substantial was there in this promise. They completely differed from what they said and what they actually meant. Clear? That is why we see that when we see first roundtable conference, we see it as a failure. When we see the second roundtable conference, we also see the second roundtable conference to be a failure, and the third roundtable conference, if nothing much could be achieved, then this conference was also a failure. However, the recommendations were analyzed, and the Government of India Act of 1935, a very, very important act. Still, our constitution is largely based on the Government of India Act of 1935, was passed on this basis. And now in 1932, we will study about the Pune Pact. Let us see the causes of this Pune Pact. As we have already studied in the second roundtable conference, there were issues between Gandhiji and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar on the topic of separate electorates based on the communities. So let us see, Dr. Ambedkar was in favor of a separate electorate. We have already studied in class 9th. Electorate is here, what it means is constituency for the depressed classes. Clear? This was laid down in him in the first roundtable conference. He was representing the depressed classes in the conference. He also had formed in 1930 Depressed Classes Association. Clear, students? In 1930, one important association was formed by Dr. Ambedkar, and this is known as Depressed Classes Association, to be noted by all of you. Next, we see that Gandhi was against this idea, and when Prime Minister MacDonald, of course the Prime Minister of Britain at that point of time, decided to grant communal awards to minorities and the depressed classes, he undertook a fast. Let us see, he undertook a fast whilst in jail in Pune. So Gandhiji went on a fast. He wanted this provision to be removed due to public pressure. Let us see what happened due to public pressure to the end the fast unto death. There was a pact which was signed between Gandhiji and Dr. Ambedkar, and what was the outcome? What was the compromise made between them? So it laid down reserved seats for the depressed classes in the provincial legislatures, means in the state legislatures, plus elections which would be through joint electorates. Okay, so a compromise was made between Gandhiji and Dr. Ambedkar. Let us try to understand all these provisions in a bit of detail. We also see that along with the seats being reserved in provincial legislatures, certain seats for the provincial legislatures would be reserved for the depressed classes, and as well as central legislature. In the central legislature, 19% of the seats would be reserved for the depressed classes. So 2 points to be taken out from here is, first, in the provincial legislatures some seats would be reserved for the depressed classes, as well as in the central legislature 19% of the seats are seen to be reserved for these people. Now this system would continue for 10 years. Another important point to be noted, students, the compromise, the provision had 10 years. The system would continue for 10 years unless a mutual agreement consents to terminate it earlier. What does this statement mean? It means that if Gandhiji and Dr. Ambedkar strike out a compromise before 10 years, it's good. This will be terminated, the pact will be terminated. Otherwise, this pact was going to continue for 10 years. Now let us see some more provisions. Fair representation of the depressed classes would be ensured by all means. Okay, nobody would be discriminated against on the basis of caste on matters regarding election to the local bodies or in public services appointments. a certain sum of money, we also see a certain sum of money from the educational grant would be allotted for the education of the depressed classes in all provinces. Since Gandhiji had undertaken a fast unto death, so a compromise was made out between these two parties due to public pressure, and therefore he ended his fast. Here we see the provisions of this pact, that the significant provisions are provincials and central legislatures. Seats were reserved for the depressed classes in the provincial legislatures, as well as a 19% reservation provided to them in the central legislature. And the rest of the facts we have already discussed. So if you have any doubts, please keep me posted. Read each and every word of your textbook very nicely. Do make notes and keep revising the chapter. We can conduct a test at any point of time. Thank you.